you got to be specific. Like for anyone listening, you got to be specific on what you want. And nobody's perfect at that, or else, we wouldn't be, going after different things. But I think if you want to go high volume, which is something I'm looking into, you got to really understand, number one, what you're getting into. And number two, how do you do that and keep increasing your net income every year, not decreasing it? Because what do they say? More money, more problems. Like if you got more transactions, that's more fires you got to put out. That's more organizational flow. So really, the way I kind of look at it now is I'm still very young in my journey as an entrepreneur. And step one, at least in my books, was understand how to produce income on your own, like real income on your own. And then when you start doing that, then start growing up from a good foundation versus just hitting a big deal and start pouring money into marketing. And next thing you know, you're just kind of like, it gets a little crazy.
Helping hardworking real estate investors, agents, and entrepreneurs grow a better business, mindset, and future. This is the Carrot Cast podcast. Now here's your host, Trevor Mock.
What's up, y'all? So one of my favorite things that I do here at Carrot is I love, number one, getting on podcasts like the Carrot Cast. It gives me energy. If you guys have heard the episodes about the energy audit, the reason this podcast exists is because I took the energy audit that I created. I took it in 2016. And I realized, man, writing articles drains my energy, but talking to amazing entrepreneurs gives it. And one of the best interviews I've been on myself in a long time was on the podcast with the gentleman you guys are about to meet right now, if you guys don't already know who he is. But before I introduce Greg to the Carrot Cast officially, which, like we were saying, dude, before you hopped on, I don't know why it's taking me so long to get you on here, which is crazy. But guys, the first spot that I really remember Greg jumping out in my mind in a big way. So we met at Investor Fuel, the mastermind, probably a couple of years ago. Is when we originally met in person the first time. But dude, I remember you doing your book reviews, and I want to dive into that a little bit.
Sure.
And being insanely consistent, and you still are with those book reviews. And it's inspiring when someone's on a growth journey like that. It's inspiring when someone's consistent like that. And I want to give you kudos. So I want to officially welcome onto the Carrot Cast, Mr. Greg Helbeck. So welcome on, man. Appreciate you.
It's an honor to be here, man. One of my favorite podcasts I always listen to. So it's cool to be in the guest seat,
I love it. So dude, let me kind of dive into that book thing really fast, because one of the things I've admired the most about you, and there's, probably on one or two handfuls, there's names within my orbit of Carrot customers, industry, stuff like that, of people who are just hungry to grow, and not just hungry to grow, but they actually then grow as a result. And you're one of the guys that has been on that list for me for a couple of years, because you're out there all the time and you're smiling and you're actually doing it. Dude, what started the book reviews for you? How often do you do them, and why do you keep doing those things?
Yeah. So they've been going well over 2 years strong now. It's kind of like I haven't missed a weekend. Like I have an auto reminder where I just like make a quick post and post it. So I've always been a big book reader. I mean, some people love reading, some people don't get value from it. I've always found a lot of value from reading books and reading the same books over and over again. And a couple of years ago, I was like, you know what? Like, there's a lot of stuff on social media that is negative, and let me see how I can put some sort of positive content out in the marketplace that's consistent. And I figured, well, what if I just took all these books that I read and reread, right, and listen to, and just do a little quick synopsis, like you can read it in 10 seconds, and a little quick video you can watch in a minute. And then that little piece of content could maybe inspire someone to pick that book up. And then obviously you pick that book up, usually they're 200, 300 pages. One book can change your life. There's a few books that I've read that have absolutely changed my life. So if I can potentially put out that message and have someone connect to the book that could change their life, I mean, it means a lot to me, because it's the small things added up that really matter.
Dude, what are those life-changing books for you? Which ones stand out?
Ray Dalio Principles. I read that all the time. I think when different parts of my journey, I'm kind of going back to that book to reflect, which he talks a lot about in there. Ray Dalio Principles, The Compound Effect, Darren Hardy. That book really gets me when I'm not in my rhythm. I go back and listen to that book, and it gets me kind of back in that small win, delayed gratification mindset. And then a third book I would say from a marketing perspective is Dan Kennedy, No BS Direct Marketing book, because it just forces me to hold all my ads accountable, because this is a marketing business, as you know. And I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, especially when you start to grow, you can get a bit lazy with your marketing and you're like throwing money out and you don't really know what the ROI is. So anytime I listen to a Dan Kennedy or read a Dan Kennedy, it gets me thinking like, I got to be on top of my game with marketing because that's the business we're all in ultimately.
Dude, oh man, my computer's not going to shift over there. So somewhere, where is it? Which row? One of these rows, I've got like five or six of Dan Kennedy's No BS books. Yeah. No BS Time Management is a good one.
Great one.
All kinds of stuff. Well, Greg, man, I'm pumped to hop on with you. So we're going to do a couple micro episodes, y'all. As you guys are listening to this, Greg has an amazing real estate business. We're going to talk about what he's doing as an investor. He's actually in New York right now, attending to some properties. And we'll talk about where you live and where you operate business with Velocity Home Buyers. But this one, we're going to talk kind of more about negotiation techniques because that's something Greg's been amazing at. There's a lot of his deals remotely, a lot of his deals aren't where he lives. If maybe none of them are, I don't know. We'll talk about that.
Two of them,
Then the second part that we're going to be talking about is really your metrics, tracking your numbers so you can have consistency in your business. Greg just mentioned there about marketing, throwing a ton of marketing away and not really knowing what's working. We're going to talk about how he is using, how he's tracking his numbers, tracking his metrics better, what to look for, what you should be tracking to keep an eye on it. So before we dig into the negotiation part of it, Greg, let's give people some context. What's your business? Where do you live, but also where do you do deals? Then give people some sort of context for the size of the business. Do you have a team? Share whatever you're willing to share numbers wise so people can have context where you're coming from.
Yeah. So I've been in the real estate game for about 5 years now. Time kind of flies. This is the only thing I've ever done in my career. I started in college, was doing deals in college. And then once I got out of college, I started picking up some serious momentum. So the primary business in the beginning was just wholesaling houses, man, doing it in a tough area in New York, which is not very friendly to new investors. So I struggled a lot in the beginning, to be fully transparent. Took me a few years to really get any sort of traction where I was hitting, anywhere close to the six-figure mark. After that, so I started in New York, wholesaled a bunch of houses, wholesaled a decent amount of houses. And I started realizing like, if I could not physically get out of this market, I was going to always be chained here. So this virtual wholesaling thing was kind of popular 3 years ago. Now it's really popular. Yeah. So literally, honestly, like back in 2018, I was doing, a deal-ish a month in New York, making decent money, because the spreads in this market are pretty high. So doing that. And then I ended up jumping down into Dallas, Texas, actually, before all the cold calling and texting and list stacking got like kind of mainstream. Yep. I was just kind of doing it by accident. And I kind of caught that trend like right in the beginning where there was not a lot of competition doing it. So I was able to essentially jump into Dallas, Texas. And within, this is not probably typical anymore, but within like 90 days, 3 to 4 big deals a month where, I was personally cold calling these people, locking deals up on the phone, and we were flipping these houses and wholetailing them at that time, making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a shot. So my business kind of took off from there. I've never been a high volume guy. Still to this day, I'm not doing 6, 7, 8 houses a month. I'm doing 2, 3, 4 really good sized deals a month. And I've kind of had it that way ever since. But anyway, did a lot of virtual deals in Dallas, Texas. Eventually that marketing channel wasn't as profitable as it used to be. So I eventually started jumping back into my home market of geographically my home market in New York, where I'm from, fix and flipping houses, doing wholesales, rentals now. So I've really focused on a little lean, mean operation for the past 5 years. And I think there's some cons to it, but there's also some really big pros to it that aren't as talked about because a lot of guys are just trying to keep scaling up, which is great. But I think you got to do that a certain way unless, or else you can be in some cash flow issues. So that's kind of the lay of the land of my business. I do a little bit of stuff in San Diego now, but that market is wild.
So San Diego, that's where you live full time, right? Right now?
Yeah. So I forgot to mention, I moved to San Diego about 2 years ago in 2018. So I was operating mostly in Dallas, Texas, living in San Diego. And then eventually I started to gravitate more towards New York, even though when I moved across the country, I started doing deals back on the East Coast just because of the marketing, and that we can get into that either this show or the next show. But I've been doing a lot of remote deals. I've done tons of them. I can't even count at this point. And now I do a few deals here and there in San Diego. That market is challenging. That's a really tough market. It's competitive. I've done some big deals out there, but I've also lost some money out there. So I try to stick to what I'm good at.
Dude, so it's so interesting. One thing you just mentioned a little bit ago is you have focused on a lean, mean operation that has really good profit margins. Right before this, I was on a Carrot Cast with John Carcone. Amazing. Does 140. Oh, dude, amazing. 140 deals a year, 12-person team. And the topic we were talking about on that one was that he's built the business where it's a great, great business, but he wants to have his schedule not so crammed, right? It's like, so we dug into what was the original dream that you wanted when you started the company. Why did you then shift it to really grow a team and scale to a bunch of deals? And when we were talking about it, it's like, man, I remember when it was just me and a couple of VAs, and I had a general contractor that I would kind of hire to do stuff. And he's like, it was amazing. I'd net $500,000 a year, and I had a lot of time, and I didn't really have things in my schedule.
Yeah.
And there's the pros and cons to that, right? So you're kind of speaking to that, where fewer deals but larger can actually help you save time, like gives you time back.
It definitely can. And I think that you got to be specific, like for anyone listening, you got to be specific on what you want. And nobody's perfect at that, or else, we wouldn't be, going after different things. But I think if you want to go high volume, which is something I'm looking into, you got to really understand, number one, what you're getting into. And number two, how do you do that and keep increasing your net income every year, not decreasing it? Because what do they say? More money, more problems. Like if you got more transactions, that's more fires you got to put out. That's more organizational flow. So really, the way I kind of look at it now is I'm still very young in my journey as an entrepreneur. And step one, at least in my books, was understand how to produce income on your own, like real income on your own. And then when you start doing that, then start growing up from a good foundation versus just hitting a big deal and start pouring money into marketing. And next thing you know, you're just kind of like, it gets a little crazy.
Mm-hmm. And dude, and when you talk about the margin thing too, because Carrot, we're a different business, but Carrot's, it's similar where we've scaled, and I had that choice where it's like, man, should we keep it 5, 6, 7, 8 people and just make this a lifestyle business? And I'll kind of pull back and do the 10-hour work week thing and make okay money. But there are a couple of things for me. It's like a mentor of mine, Seth Bueckley, who right after this, him and I we have our every Thursday mentor session. He rents an office from me. Amazing dude. And so he always says, he's like, if you're wanting to increase your impact, you're probably going to have to give up some flexibility of time and potentially finances, potentially. Yeah. If you want to increase your flexibility of time or your freedom, you're probably going to have to give up some impact. And it's always kind of like that. If you want to increase your finances for a period of time, you're probably going to have to give up some freedom. And it's like this little trifecta where anytime you're trying to focus on this one part of it, the other parts also have some sort of a corollary effect. And for me, as I was looking at making that transition, I'm like, okay, well, what would I do if I were just to dial back? And I'm going, man, I really want to figure out how to make a business that really does have an impact. And can I do it where I have fun? And I know it's not going to be easy. And so that was my big shift. But the thing that made it to where when we grew headcount, we're 40 people now, which a lot of people probably have no clue that we're that big behind the scenes. 40 full-time people. I'm not talking VAs, or like that doesn't include VAs and stuff. That you always have to find ways to increase your margins, right? So how do we then make it to where the value we put out to the market is higher, so therefore the market will pay us more? And same thing with deals. If you're going to scale up your team, ideally find ways to keep your margins, your profit margins steady, or even grow them if you're wanting to scale the volume.
That is, I hope everyone rewinds the last 15 seconds, because that's a big deal, especially if you're wholesaling houses. If you start getting comfortable, if you're wholesaling and you're buddies with your buyers and you're giving them a discount, you're robbing from yourself. And I'm not saying go out there and be greedy and sell bad deals, but you need to be a business person and you need to put your business first. And you can't you have to separate a lot of I think a lot of wholesalers, they get into the situation where they have their VIP buyers list and they're selling a deal for 20 grand where they could have made 40 grand if they really marketed that thing. Yep. And if you get into a habit of doing that, you're really putting yourself in some bad business habits. So you made a great point. You got to keep increasing your margins. And that's very, very important. And I've learned that the hard way.
I love it. Well, dude, let's dive into some negotiation stuff. So, I mean, right there, we kind of even broached the subject with the buyers there. There's some stuff there, but you've done a lot of deals. You've done a lot of remote deals, virtual wholesaling. When someone picks up the phone and calls you, or I guess let's start here. What are your main marketing methods so people have context for how people are contacting you? Where do most of your leads come from, or what's the mix?
Yeah, so it's really 3 big things. It's doing direct mail and I've done that for a while. I understand that channel very, very well. So we certainly talk about that on this or the other podcast. And then the second one, this has been my most profitable deals, and it's kind of a hybrid. It's not that talked about, but instead of mass cold calling and mass texting, I'm essentially finding these properties where it's very hard to find the owners. And I'm, me and VAs and stuff like that, we will manually reach out to these people who have, usually these are vacant homes that are just a disaster on title, disaster financially. And I'm getting a lot of my deals from that channel. So I call it targeted skip tracing. It's not general cold calling. That's the pillar channel of my business. Honestly, the most money I've ever made on deals has been from that channel, bar none. And the profits are always the highest. And then the third way I'm getting deals is SEO. I mean, I just got a great SEO deal a couple months ago from having doing some online stuff. So those are really the three pillars I'm getting deals.
Cool.
And I think each channel is a little different in terms of how you need to negotiate with them. So I'd be happy to kind of get that.
Well, let's dig in there, man. So I'm going to toss over to you to kind of lead the next section of it. But one of the first things that people need to recognize is that you talk to people differently based on the lead that came, or the marketing that got them there. So I want to toss over to you, man. Run a little workshop with us. What do you do when a lead comes in now, and how can people start to shift the way that they talk to sellers and negotiate?
That's a great first question. So when a lead comes in, you really the objective, whether it's you taking the call or you have your staff taking the call, there's a lot of ways to run that sequence. But the first thing you need to do is you need to identify, how qualified is this lead? Is this somebody that I can truly serve right now? Is this somebody I can truly serve in 6 months? Is this someone who I can serve in a year? Or is this somebody who is not selling their house at a discount, because they don't want to, or whether they can't because maybe it's an equity scenario? So you got to take the temperature of your prospect, and you got to get a gauge for where they are, because based on where they are, it's like a lot of this is kind of marketing and sales in conjunction. You got to treat them how they need to be treated based on where they are, not where you want them to be. So for example, if I just got a lead actually today or yesterday. They called in, I let go of one of my people, so I was taking the phone calls. And this guy has got a property, wants to sell it, needs work, but he's not going to sell in 30 days. He's not going to sell in 90 days. He's going to sell in 6 months, right? So I spent time with him. I took his temperature. I asked why he's selling, et cetera. And I put him in a bucket based on where he was at. And now based on the bucket that he's in, he's going to get treated accordingly, which is a 30-day drip until he's ready to take action. So I think anytime you're cutting deals with sellers, you need to figure out really where they're at. So once you identify where they're at, then the next step would be, you got to find out really, obviously this is kind of common, but why are they selling? What's their why behind why they're selling their property? Because a lot of people, we talk about this in the KPI thing, they think they're getting leads, but that really they're probably not great leads. And I would almost categorize them differently, because they're not necessarily people that you can help. And I think that people kind of give themselves incorrect data, which I don't want to go down that right now, but basically once you have that lead identified and you're qualifying them, you got to get to the serious reason on why they're selling. Because if you're in the business of providing solutions, buying houses for cash, the only way you're going to get a price that works for you and works for the seller is if the seller has a reason to sell their house. And usually it's they need work, or they don't want to deal with it, or it's some sort of issue that's going on where it's enticing for them and it's beneficial for them truly to take a little bit lower of a price for an easy, convenient sale. So step number 2 would be, you got to get their why on the table. And to give everyone like a tactical, practical, like how to do that. I don't want to just like, you do this. And then, you just got to ask them open-ended questions. So instead of asking them questions that backs them into a corner, you say, hey, Trevor, what's the reason you want to sell this property? Why do you want to sell? And when I ask a question like that, I was just doing this on a deal today. I want the other person doing all the talking, because if the other person's doing all the talking, I'm doing all the listening, and then I can gather what they're telling me to try to provide the next, the solution to them. So step number 2 is find out their why by asking questions. And then to give you a third pillar, and this is a big one, and I think there's some mixed opinions on this, but I have the data and the P&Ls to support this third step. It is, you need to understand what is their price? What do they want for the house? I think a lot of people, they get hung up on a lot of the stuff that I mentioned, but they're afraid to negotiate. And this business, when you're buying houses, a lot of it is truly a negotiation. You're not selling, you're negotiating because they already want to sell because they're reaching out to you. So you want to get a number out of them as soon as you can. And then once you have those 3 things, you're in a situation where you can determine what's the next step in that sequence, whether that's setting an appointment, making an offer, following up, whatever the case is. But those really are the three pillars you want to cover when you're talking with a prospect in this business.
Dude, so what are the biggest ways that, like, what will you ask them to get the number? Because like you said, there are kind of different rules of thought or schools of thought on that. Some people say don't talk about the number. Some people do. Some people say never give your number first, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do when you're broaching that subject with your clients?
So what I'm doing is I number one, I want to make sure that they're comfortable speaking on the phone with me. There's not any resistance or animosity going on or tension going on, because then they're not going to share what they need to share in order to see if we can help them. So number one, assuming we're on the same page and they have a reason they're selling, it's not just like a, what's your offer kind of thing. I like to go right and say, hey, what's a price that works for you that would be able to get you to sell this property and have me solve all these problems you're telling me. So I just want what's your price? A lot of the times I think people they can try to make it more complicated than it is. What is your price is a pretty good first question. And if you can kind of wrap that question around, hey, if I can help you move to Idaho and take care of this property that has all these delinquent taxes, what's a price you want to get for this thing to make sure that you feel like, it's worth it to you. So you got to you got to frame the ask, what's your price, to how it's going to benefit them, because then they're going to think about it differently. They're going to say, oh, well, in order for me to move to Idaho and get my taxes paid off, well, I need X. And that comes off way better psychologically versus, hey, Trevor, what do you want for your house? Then you sound like you're in a pawn shop or something,
Gotcha. Yeah.
So that's a big one. If they don't give you the price, a good one that I always say, there's two, I'll give you two. Second one is, hey, what are some properties in the neighborhood going for? Because a lot of people, they know what they want for their house, but they don't want to tell you because they don't want you to, have that backfire.
Gotcha.
So I'll just say, hey, what are some properties in your neighborhood going for? They have no problem talking about their neighbor's house. And when they say that, well, you say, okay, that makes sense. You want more or less for yours.
That's good, man. I like that.
And then the third one, this one is my favorite. I just got a really hot deal from this. And this was totally like, just kind of pulled this out of my, what? And, cause I couldn't get a price out of this guy, and it's all virtual. So I didn't see him. I said, Mr. Seller, what price would make you feel like you're giving this house away? So I got them. I want him to anchor himself. So he's like telling me what he will not do. And then from there, he said a number, and then we ended up negotiating up a bit. But those are the three ways I like to do it. And they work pretty well. I mean, they're not going to work 100% of the time, but they'll work 6-7% of the time, and 6 to 7 out of 10, which is better than 3 out of 10.
Dude, that last one that you were saying, that's a really clever one, and I love it, because at the end of the day, sounds like you were hitting a roadblock. You guys weren't kind of getting further in that, and you had to reposition, and that's something when we're talking about negotiation, we're talking about those kinds of things. We're always having to reposition. Oh, you want to say hi, Cindy? Say hi, Colton.
Hey, what's going on, man?
So those of you guys who are watching the YouTube version of this, you got to see two. McKinley, come back here and say hi. You can't have two of my kids, not all three. That's my third.
Hey, what's going on?
I've had a pizza on my desk all day, and they coming in and ravaging my pizza.
That's hilarious.
So I'm going to have some of it here in a bit. But so with that, the thing I love about it, and this is something that people need to recognize when they're in negotiation, is not everything that you're going to be saying is going to land the way that you hope. So there always has to be a backup or way to reposition or way to adjust things. And the way that you asked that was really, really good, because it took it off of the question of what I want, because that person was stuck on that. Well, if I tell you what I want, because someone says you never want to show your cards first, I tell you what I want, therefore I'm going to be put behind the 8 ball, right? Yeah. And it's like, well, no, I'm not telling you what I want. I'm telling you what I don't want, essentially.
Yes. Starting with no. Yeah, that's a great book, by the way. That's one of my favorite books. But yeah, you're starting with what I will not do, and then therefore we can get that as a basis and work up from there. And a lot of it's just kind of reading people. Maybe it's on the phone or in person, but I think, I don't want to keep mentioning books here, but it's like, there's a book called You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar, and you can't learn how to negotiate at a seminar. You got to go out and get some information, and then go out in the trenches and start swinging the bat, because that's where you learn the most, is in the streets. I'm sure you and I could, that's how you experience it. You got to take action and try these things and see how they work with people and get the feedback loop firing. And, I think the simpler you can keep it, the better. But those tactics that I gave definitely will help people, get some better deals.
I love it, man. Dude, so let me throw a scenario at you. So let's say, let's say you guys are way, way, way off on price. Do you still, will you still make an offer? Is it something you pull away? Kind of like, what do you usually do there?
That's a great question, because that happens all the time. You get a hot lead, and they're so hot until they talk about the price, and then you're like, oh yeah, that's not true. So normally there's two things I do. Number one, I try to figure out if we're kind of far on price, generally speaking, normally they'll bring up that they might want to list their house with an agent, which is totally cool. It's part of our business too. We refer a lot of leads out.
Yep.
I think the agent investor conjunction is just really smart. That's a
big time
topic, but it makes a lot of sense. So usually that I'm going to list my house is probably going to come up. That's probably going to come up. And then I at least know that might be a deal killer that I'll have to either, deal with or accept as a reality.
Yep. The
second thing that I will say, this is more practical, is if we're really far off in price, let's say, they want 100 or they want 100, I need to be at 50 or just something like that. I would say, something along the lines of, I understand you want 100. That totally makes sense. Let me ask you, let me just make an assumption here, Mr. Seller. It sounds to me like because you want that price, which is totally fine, it sounds like any other the benefits that I can offer, the easy sale, the convenient sale, the as-is sale, it sounds like those things really aren't that important to you, and getting the most money is just the absolute most important thing to you. And I'll say that and I'll just stop. And then at that point, they're either going to say, that's true, I just want the most money. You're a nice guy, Greg, but no. Or they're going to say, well, I don't want to list it either. And now I have another pain point that I can dig into and see if there's a way I can kind of reframe that call on like, hey, what's more important? Do you want the easy sale at 50, which is okay, or do you want the most money at 100? I'm not going to force you to do anything, Mr. Prospect, but I just want to make sure that that you feel like you're making the best decision possible. And it gets them clear on what the decision is they have to make. And it's a no pressure approach with me. I'm not pressuring anyone. But that's how I handle that. I get them to kind of make the decision on their own, and then we go from there.
Dude, that's so good, because like you're saying, a lot of times the seller might not actually know the value that the investor plays versus the retail market. And so by positioning it that way, you're clearly showing the value that you have, and you're showing the value that the retail market has, and then they can decide on which value they want to move into, which is amazing. I like it.
And that can kind of go into any type of, this is the investing game is a little different, because it's like you're buying the house for a selling thing. But like, let's say I'm selling a coaching or consulting or something, and it's like 30 grand. This is not true, but I'm just saying, say it's 30,000 or something. And someone's like, well, I only got 10. I'm like, I totally get it, but this is the value I can bring. This is how it can benefit you. Is it worth spending 30 to get X, or is it not? And if it's not, I totally get it. But you got to get them to see the value in order for them to take action. So it's like any type of sales. It's just like a way of reframing the decision they ultimately have to make and what's greater.
Dude, I love it. So we're going to be bringing you back for another micro episode. We're going to talk about metrics. We're going to talk about how to make sure that you're using data and numbers the right way in your business to really empower you. But before we move to that next one, Greg, dude, you have an amazing podcast. I was lucky enough to be on it recently. Dude, where can people follow you? Where can people find you? Where can they find the podcast? And then we'll bring them back in this next episode this next week.
Yeah. So you could go Instagram, Grego_37. That's the best way to get in touch with me, like through Messenger or something like that. That's the only social I really like, to be honest.
Dude, I'm with you, man. I'm with you 100%.
Facebook is, especially with this election stuff, I'm totally like over that. And then the best way to get in touch with the podcast, if you want to check it out, it's called Pave the Way Podcast. So any major player, podcast player, Pave the Way Podcast, Greg Helbeck, it'll come right up. And there's some reviews and we got great guests on there like Trevor. And the goal is to be as helpful as possible in those episodes and give everyone as much value as we can.
Dude, I saw, so speaking of the podcast, I saw, man, I'm completely blanking out. 75 Hard.
Oh, Andy. Yeah, Andy.
Did Andy come on, or is that something you were working on scheduling?
It's in the works. So he was supposed to come on, and then he had to cancel last minute for some reason. So we rescheduled for this month. So hopefully we can get the recording done this month, and then I can air that thing out whenever it's done. But that's pretty cool. I mean, getting him to commit, at least via email right now, to come on the show is really cool. I've looked up to him for a while, and it's going to be a fun one.
Dude, that's awesome. So guys, go check it out. Pave the Way Podcast. Listen to the one with me. Tons of other amazing guests. Andy Frisella is coming on. Hopefully cross our fingers here soon. That'll be an amazing one too. So guys and gals, make sure you guys are going over to Apple Podcasts, liking and subscribing over there. Okay. Give us a rating and review. The more ratings and reviews that we get over there, the more we can spread our message to more people over there. We're somewhere 200-300 ratings. Let's get that higher. I want to hit 500 by the middle of this next year and get this podcast rated higher and get it in more people's hands. But Greg, appreciate you coming on, man. Amazing having you on here. And we're going to have you right back for the episode on tracking your numbers to gain consistency in your business. Thanks, Greg.